there are many big and small wars going around the world today. And two of the biggest are the Russian-Ukraine war and the US-led Iran war. And in fact, war is not something that we like very much, isn't it? So sometimes when you look at the Bible and it uses the metaphor of war to represent our lives, maybe you're not so comfortable with it, or maybe you think twice about it. Now, there are maybe other reasons, there are maybe all kinds of reasons why Paul used the metaphor of war, right? Warfare. It's possible that he saw or he heard about wars in the Roman Empire, and that's where he got those metaphors from, right? But there may be another even closer link. Paul was a rabbi. Paul was a Jew. He read the Old Testament. So he was very familiar with the concept of holy war in the Old Testament. Now, of course, the concept of holy war today is has very bad rap, right? We think of a holy war, we think of people who, they kill people indiscriminately, or the suicide bombing, things like that. Well, actually, the concept itself is not that bad. Why? Because holy war means war not fought for our own sake, but for the sake of God, right? God calling us to fight a war. God called Israel to fight a war, so they fought. It was not for their own interest, but at the command of God. That's what the holy part of holy war meant. All right. How it turned out, of course, it wasn't exactly the way we thought about. And Israel were not the only people who fought holy war in the Old Testament time. A lot of people fought this kind of holy wars. Well, one reason why Israel had to fight those holy wars was because God gave the land flowing with milk and honey. It was called the Promised Land. But just because it was promised doesn't mean that they didn't have to do anything for it. So when they went into Canaan, they have to fight these holy wars under the direction of God. Now, there's a whole body of literature about it, right? There's a lot of things written about it, whether it was real, whether it was just skirmishes over different places, or whether there was full-scale war. There are many articles and essays written on those. Now, we're not going to go into that today. And in fact, the whole idea whether God's promise to Israel is still valid, that idea of the promised land is still valid today, is debatable because the Old Testament, the New Testament thing. Now, we don't have to worry about that because we are in the New Testament anyway. We are Christians. Now, for us, there's no need to fight for any land. We don't have a land, the promised land. We're not looking forward to the promised land. We're looking forward to the new heaven and new earth. And there's nothing we can do about it to bring about this new heaven and new earth. It's not like we have to take up arms to fight to bring about the kingdom of God on earth kind of thing. No, we don't do that. And there's nothing we can do about it. And even in the whole idea of the holy city, Jerusalem as a holy city, by the way, that concept was late, all right? Somewhere, maybe before Crusades. The earliest I've heard of people talking about the holy city was in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Yeah, one very famous Bible scholar say that maybe even during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, there was the beginning of the concept of the holy city. Anyway, for us, the holy city is still Jerusalem. And in fact, Jerusalem is the holy city of three major religions, right? Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. But if for all those three, I think for Christians, we hold that the least important. Why? Because we are not looking for the old Jerusalem. In the Bible, in the book of Revelation, we are looking for the new Jerusalem from heaven. And again, there's nothing we can do about it to bring about this new Jerusalem coming down on earth kind of thing. It's not like we can take up arms to bring it about. So in terms of physical war, we shouldn't have we are not commanded to be involved in physical war. All right, there's no command to be involved in physical war in the New Testament. But just because we are not commanded to fight any physical war doesn't mean that we're not commanded to fight any war. We've just looked at the verse. There is a war going on, but it's a spiritual war. It's spiritual warfare. And spiritual warfare cannot be fought with physical weapons. We cannot take up arms to fight this war. Physical warfare uses physical weapons. Spiritual warfare, we need spiritual weapons. Most people at this point will think of Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 20 about the armor of God. All right. And that's good. I think Paul uses that metaphor of war, but when he actually goes into it, talking about how to fight the war, he was talking about spiritual armor, all right? Prayer, preaching the gospel, that kind of a thing. I want to remind us, armors, no matter how good the armors are, no matter how good the equipments are, armors don't win war. It's the people who put on the armor that win the war. So it's the same thing with spiritual warfare. And the word of God is sharper than any sword. All right, it's a magnificent weapon, but it's not. The Bible itself doesn't win any war. We have to read and we have to teach. We have to preach the Bible in order for it to have any effect. It's not the armor itself that wins war. It's the people wearing the armor that wins the war. So I think that's an important thing. The other thing that we have to remember is that using the wrong equipment to fight the war is actually catastrophic. Now, if you are from America, you of a certain age, you will have known a TV series called MacGyver. I wonder whether anybody have watched the show MacGyver. Handsome guy. He was an operative of the U.S. government. But he is very different. MacGyver, the whole show centers around the fact that MacGyver doesn't like to kill. He doesn't use a gun. So what does he use? He uses his scientific knowledge and in inventive use of normal common items to solve his problem. So he always carry a Swiss Army knife, not to kill with a knife, but because it's very useful to do all kinds of stuff. All right, in one episode, he used a paper clip, a wrench, and shoelaces to save a friend's life. Can you do that? A paper clip, a wrench, and shoelace. I don't think I can do it. Most people can't do what MacGyver does. All right, we can't do it. So most people, if you have to fight a war, you need to have weapons, right? And we need good spiritual weapons. Anyway, for example, if we want to open a can of tuna, you can use a hammer to open it, all right? You can even use a spoon. I've actually watched on YouTube, you can use a spoon and you can open a can of tuna. But, a can opener is the best way to do it, right? Similarly, to fight a spiritual war, we need spiritual weapon. Use the correct weapon. Don't use the wrong thing. If you use the wrong thing, it could be catastrophic. All right? You may not get the intended effect, and in fact, you may worsen the whole thing. So, in fighting this spiritual warfare, we have to use spiritual armor, the kind of weapons that God gives us, like prayer, preaching the gospel, faith, love, that kind of thing. That's how we fight this warfare. All right, let's stop that for a moment because that's not what I want to talk about. If you remember, this sermon, by the way, was supposed to be the concluding sermon of the series I was talking about at the beginning of the year. Remember, I came here like once every month or something, and I preached a series on godliness and all that. Well, this was supposed to be the concluding sermon, which was supposed to be preached at the end of July. And you know what happened at the end of July? There was this storm, so we never got to do it. So now I'm doing it. So this is a little bit of recap on what was supposed to be there. in this verse itself, in verse 11, actually Paul told us how to fight the war. Other than the armor he talked about in Ephesians, actually he talked about other things, like to avoid certain things. And if you look at the context say avoid heresies, all right? Avoid greed, that kind of thing. But that was not the only list that Paul has. If you look at Paul has a lot of lists at different places, and sometimes he is very, very detailed in the list of sins, that you should avoid. So we don't need to talk about that. If you really want to have one word for the things that we are supposed to avoid, sin, all right? But to avoid something, you have to pursue something. So he gives us another list of things we need to pursue, all right? Righteousness, godliness, faith, love, steadfastness, and then one more thing. Something that is very soft and nice to other people, all right? Now, so we are supposed to pursue that. Again, that's not the only list that he has, because he has like the fruit of the Spirit, so he lists a whole lot of things too, right? So again, there are different lists, but that list, I think, is has its own dynamics. It starts off with something that is very strong. You can say it's difficult on new Christian, righteousness. Have you thought of that word? I remember when I was talking about that, I mentioned it that time. Righteousness is a really heavy word. It's overwhelming, all right? It's like the noonday sun, before which all sins, unrighteousness must be destroyed. Wow, if you're an unrighteous person, you stand next to a righteous person, it feels overwhelming, all right? Oppressive even. And that's how he started off the list. But the last thing on the item I remember now is gentleness. At the end, it was like you have to be gentle. And a scholar defined gentleness as a strong person's reaction to a weak person. I like that. I like that very much. How the strong accommodate and love somebody who's weak. That's gentleness. It's not because you are in the same boat. It's because you're not in the same boat, right? You are good in math. He's not good in math. And then you're gentle toward the person, right? If you're both bad in math, then you can't be gentle. So, and in between, as he goes along, and the list actually goes from very strong virtue to something that's actually soft, right? Gentleness. The next on the list was godliness. Now, godliness can also be very strong. Godly. Have you thought of a godly? Godliness, whenever it surfaces in a big way in church history, even in the Bible, it usually bring a lot of destruction, and is very, again, overwhelming, right? A godly person. You stand next to a godly person. Think of the Pharisees. Think of Cromwell, England, that kind of thing. All of a sudden, it becomes too much to handle. Godliness is like a white piece of paper. If you have one little dot on it, then it's not godly anymore, that kind of thing. So it's still quite overwhelming. Not as much as righteousness, but it's still. But by the time you get to faith is actually softer, right? It's faith. But again, faith is not easy. You have faith, you don't have faith. Do you have faith? It could be bad. It could be difficult on a person who is weak. All right? Yes, I don't have faith. Yes, I have weak faith. Anything short of faith, weak faith, no faith, is actually negative. All right, the next is love. Now, love is the one thing where I think that there is a transition where it has both strong and weak characteristics. Tough love. You can have tough love, right? You love, therefore you discipline, so it's tough love. But love itself is a soft thing, accommodating, all right? Being able to accept people who are not as good, that's love, right? So by the time you get to love, then it's softer. Steadfastness. Steadfastness is silent. You have a steadfast person is not someone who is making a lot of noise. He's steadfast. He's just there all the time. And you notice the existence of steadfastness by its absence. When the steadfast person is no longer there, suddenly there's a big hole, right? the reliable person, the reliable thing just disappear. And then suddenly you realize, oh, the person is not there. Steadfastness is silent, but it's strong. And finally, gentleness, of course. Gentleness is how you treat other people, right? So Paul was telling us how to fight the war. Being a good soldier, you have to know how to retreat, and you have to know how to pursue, right? To retreat from sin, to pursue godliness, pursue the good things. And then he talked about fighting the good fight here. So it's all connected, right? It's all connected. But really, when you think about it, why did Paul use such a, again, don't you think it's a very strong metaphor to talk about being a soldier? I once asked my colleague at the seminary, if we interview for a job at the seminary, teaching at the seminary, and the person say, "Are you willing to die for it?" We said, "Whoa, I'm just coming for a job. I just want to teach. Why all of a sudden? Why do you ask me whether I'm willing to die for it?" No, I'm not willing to die for it. But essentially, that's what it is, right? Suddenly, all of a sudden, this martial kind of imagery pops up. A soldier. I just want to be a Christian. I just want to be a good Christian. Why talk about being a soldier? Why use such a strong metaphor to represent something that maybe I wasn't thinking about it at the time, and now suddenly you say, if you come to church, you go to baptism class, now you're a soldier. Have you ever thought of that? Well, we have to ask ourselves why Paul used that metaphor. Now, I'm not asking where he got it from. We just talk about it, right? He got it from the Old Testament, maybe. He got it from the Roman armies, maybe. But I'm asking the question, why? What was he trying to say by using such a metaphor? Why use this metaphor and not some others? Now, he actually did use some other metaphor. But let me suggest, firstly, maybe to ask us not to become complacent, and let our guard down. A soldier, if you're a soldier, you can't be complacent. You can't let your guard down. Why? Think about Timothy. This letter was written to Timothy. If you read the book of Acts, you realize what happened. Paul went to Ephesus, and he preached there for 3 years. He was very successful. A lot of people came to Christ, but there was a problem. What was the problem? Ephesus was the major port city in Asia Minor, all right? So it was a very prosperous, it was a big city, lots of people, lots of rich people. It has a 5-mile long wall that surrounds the city. The population was about 250,000, which doesn't look a lot to you now. A few of our housing estate, we have 250,000. No, but at that time, 250,000 people in one city, that's a big city, all right? So that was a big city. It's a major city. It's like Shanghai or Tokyo or something like that of the time. And more importantly, it was the temple warden of the goddess Artemis. Yeah, Artemis was a very famous goddess at the time. And the idol there was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And they were the warden of that idol. So it was a city steeped in idol worship of the goddess Artemis. And Paul got into trouble with these people because a lot of people believe in Christ, so a lot of people are not going to the temple of Artemis. They were not buying statues of Artemis. So these people were losing money, so they caused an uproar and they kicked Paul out. And that was what happened. And what did he do? He left Timothy in Ephesus. Yeah, because he can't be there, so he left Timothy. Timothy is a good choice, actually. Why? Because he's timid. All right, he's the guy, he wouldn't stand up, people wouldn't attack him just because he's just a timid guy. If you look at the letters about, to Timothy, he was like, he might have been sickly, he was timid, that kind of a person, but he was very bright, but he was timid. So he was exactly the type of guy you want to leave behind in a city that is looking for an alpha male, for example. He was not that, right? But Paul was concerned. Timothy was a young man. He was living in one of the biggest cities of the ancient world. ancient Mediterranean world, right? It was full of idol worship. Artemis, the big temple of Artemis was there. So that's why he told Timothy to be careful, and to be a soldier. Remind him that he has to be a soldier, all right? Has to think like a soldier. You shouldn't let your guard down. You're living in prosperity. You shouldn't let your guard down. There are opposition, maybe not as much as when Paul was there, but nonetheless, there were oppositions. I think that actually reflects us in Hong Kong too. We're living in a very big city. It's easy to miss the fact that we're in the midst of a spiritual warfare. You can go along every day and live your life and be quite happy, and nothing has happened. Nobody is going to just pick you up because you're a Christian and persecute you. And that's one reason why we have to remember we're soldiers. We have to be careful. We should not let our guard down. So that's one thing. The other thing I think is to remind Timothy that he has to continually train himself in spirituality. A soldier has to train himself continually. I guess you know that. I teach, if you know me, I teach Old Testament in the Baptist Seminary in Saigon. And every time at some point we teach about Egypt, right? There are reliefs in Egypt that showing this Egyptian having boxing matches. They're fighting. Yeah, it's there. Clearly there this bunch of Egyptian young men doing martial arts. Every time I teach that slide, I say, look, Shaolin Temple in Egypt. And it is, Shaolin Temple in Egypt. They fight. Of course, they have to train. They have to fight. You have big Egyptian army, so there must be training. Roman army must be the same thing. I have a friend in America, Chinese pastor, very godly person. His son, one of his 3 sons, is a Marine. Or maybe I should say was a Marine. I think he got out of the Marine now. And he's very proud of his son because being a Chinese and being a Marine, I don't know, he must be taller than most people, maybe at 5'10", 5'11". That's not very tall, but he, he's not like me. His father is very proud of him. And why? Because to be a Marine is not easy. You have to be physically fitter than most. All right, you have the regular soldiers, and then you have the Marines. Of course, you have other elite groups too, but Marine was one of them. 9 to 13 weeks of physical and mental combat training. That's what they call the boot camp, the initial training, to turn a person from being a civilian to being a soldier. 9 to 13 weeks. And then afterwards, just being a soldier. We're not talking about elite soldiers. There are constant and iterative training throughout the career of a soldier until you resign. You have to train. Why? Because you still have to go through basic training. A person who can run 100 meters in 12 seconds doesn't mean that the next year you can do the same thing. You have to do it constantly. It's the same in Singapore where I was studying seminary. My fellow students, they train. Every year they have to go back for training. And of course, everything is evolving. Warfare is evolving. The technology is evolving, so they have to go back for retraining. So there's this constant retraining. Paul used another imagery, another metaphor, athlete. It was the same thing. As long as you're an athlete, you have to constantly train. All right, you run the race, you remember? You still have to constantly run and you have to train constantly. It's the same metaphor, the same meaning. Whether we're talking about athlete, we're talking about soldier. You have to train constantly. Just because at a certain point of time you can do something, that doesn't mean you can do it the next year and the next year and the next year. Now it's the same thing with us. I'm not sure how many of you have read the Bible once. But just because you have done it once doesn't mean that you remember it, right? I'm sure you realize that. I have a confession to make because I teach Old Testament, so I'm always in the Old Testament. And for a while, I think I haven't read the New Testament for a few years. Yeah, Old Testament is Bible too, okay? But anyway, until one day somebody asked me something from the New Testament, and I forgot. And I realized, how can I be? I'm a Bible teacher. Even though I'm teaching the Old Testament, I must know something in the New Testament. And it was something that in the past, I would have remembered. But I think I'm getting old and all that too. But I can tell you, just because you know something at a certain time doesn't mean that you know it all the time. All right? You have to constantly train. Just because you can do something at a certain time doesn't mean that we can do it all the time. It's constant training. I think Paul was telling Timothy, you have to constantly train. You're a soldier. You can't just relax and let it be, because then you will slack. You won't be able to do what you did before. All right? One more thing I think that the metaphor of a soldier bring across, and which is that we have to fight in difficult situation. Now, a soldier cannot complain about the situation, bad food, bad living condition. Have you ever gone to a camp, Bible camp, church camp? The moment you step inside, you say, oh my goodness, I can't stay here tonight. I have there are many type of students in the seminary. Some are rather well-to-do. I mean, really rather well-to-do, and some are not, right? So I remember one of those rather well-to-do guy. He went to a conference in Indonesia, and it was organized. Yeah, it was Indonesia, and it was organized by a Christian group. And of course, they didn't have too much money, and of course, they were living in quarters that were not too good. You know what this guy did? He went inside, he took one look of it, and he checked out, and he went to Hilton Hotel. Yeah, for the rest of the conference. I was thinking to myself, yeah, right, okay, you have money, fine. There's nothing bad about it. But really, the metaphor of a soldier exactly is the fact you can't complain about bad food. Can you imagine a soldier going on a mission? He got on the field and said, I don't like the food, I'm leaving. Or, oh, the living quarters are bad. You can't do that. The whole point of sending soldiers to fight a war is that you get into a bad situation and you win the war. All right, you get into the situation, you realize it's not good. That's why you're there. And you have to win the war. It's the same thing with us. We can't expect the situation to be good and then so that we can be good Christians. That's not the point of it. Sometimes, eco living, I don't know whether you have seen those programs. I love to watch those programs. Used to, no longer. Why? Because a lot of times when you have this ecological guru, right, coming out to show you how to live an ecological life, it's always a very expensive way of doing it. All right, big houses in the middle of forest. Of course, I can live an ecological life if I live there. All right, you have to do it in a crowded situation like Hong Kong. If you can do it here, then you can do it. All right, if the situation has to be ideal before we can do it, then we can't. It's the same thing with soldier. If the situation has to be ideal for us to be a good soldier of Christ, then maybe we can't. So the whole point of the imagery of a soldier, I think, is to bring across the fact that you can't expect things to be perfect, to be ideal in order to be a good Christian. All right? You have to expect not ideal situation, even bad situation. Well, coming back to the world in war, who knows, maybe Christ is coming. Maybe the second coming of Christ is coming soon. Who knows? Maybe, hopefully, actually. But we don't know. So in the meantime, we still are involved in this spiritual warfare. All right, and we have to be good soldiers. All right, to do it in the proper way, to do it in the way that we should be doing it. So I end instead of a long story, this is a very short story. So a chaplain was speaking to a soldier in a hospital, and he was thinking of something to encourage the soldier. So he said, "Soldier, Mr. So-and-so, you have lost an arm in the great cause for our country." The soldier replied, "No," he said with a smile, "I didn't lose it, I gave it." I think that's a very good idea. He didn't lose it accidentally. When he went on the battlefield, he realized what he was getting into. If you can give your life away, what more an arm, right? Now, I hope none of us need to lose anything. Certainly not our life, and we don't have to lose an arm to be a Christian. But think about it: to be a good soldier, if we don't need to lose anything. We are willing to lose anything at all. If we are not willing to lose anything, then what's the good soldier metaphor for, right? To be a good soldier, we have to fight it the way God teaches us to, and we have to have that concept at the back of our mind that we are willing to sacrifice for the sake of the Lord. Amen.